Welcome to Stand Up Memories Season 2. We have a Season 2. And I am with Jackie Martling. I'm Peter Bales. Here we are.
There is nothing more fortifying than starting Season 2 with our tech crew hovering over the audio and sound equipment and video equipment going, I wonder what this button does. But we're off and running. Now, something happened that we talk about old comedy things and about history, Long Island, and everything. And this is not this is a generic show. This is what we do here is called evergreen, which means you could play it today and you could play it in 5 years.
And we want people to like it in the UK, in Norway,
Wherever.
in Idaho, wherever.
But something happened last night that is not just, it's not a current thing because it's going to have repercussions for probably for years. And we're not at all political. But the whole deal is what happened was a very comedic thing, for better or for worse. And I'm referring to, of course, Chris Rock insulted, quote unquote, Will Smith's wife. And Will didn't like it, and he walked up and smacked him, which is on anybody's terms horrible. And I will brag and say NBC called me up for a comment, just in case they couldn't get anybody else. I'm sure the second they did, you get pushed off the table. But I really meant that when I told her that the Oscars have been so bad for so long. But I thought last night's was interesting. A lot of dead spots, but it was really interesting, and it was fun, and they were trying a lot of stuff. And that marred the whole thing.
Yes.
Yes. And it's crazy, and all the comics are going to weigh in on whether that's right, whether that's wrong, and when you insult somebody, how far should you... But everybody's going to be different. What you think you can say, what I think what made me think about talking about this, you guys were talking about Otto and George before.
The comics have been on social media. They're going to have a different take maybe than the general public. A lot of comics are worried that this gives license to audience members to go on stage and strike a comedian if they don't...
To the point where we shouldn't even say that.
We shouldn't even
Power
maybe
of
say
suggestion.
that. Power of suggestion. But...
It's the old thing. I hate to say it, but you go to a comedy club and you sit in the front, and you wear a hat with a feather,
right?
Please don't notice me, And I'm not saying that's what was happening, but
it was
the reason I'm talking about this is going to linger for so long because there are two. It's so you shouldn't and you should and you shouldn't and you should. Like, who cares? Lighten up, it's a very debatable thing.
On Facebook, one comic, very funny guy named Frank Vignola wrote, I remember I got one time hit with some chicken wings. This is bringing out nightmare stories from other comics. He got hit by chicken wings, and I hit reply, and I said, I once got hit with a canned ham.
That's great.
I did write that.
The old story about Bob Woods... and I think it actually happened, or something like it happened in Animal House, but that was, the story was Woods was opening at my father's place for somebody, like a Steppenwolf or somebody, and somebody threw a can of beer at him. And he caught it and opened it up and drank it. And then I think Belushi actually did that, so that might, some form of that. But I actually pulled my guys out of the Neptune pub in the days when we didn't have comedy yet. We were all working at Dixon's, Richard M. Dixon's White House Inn, but it was a variety showcase. He paid us $5 on a good night, but the guys would come to where I was with my guitar and my amplifier, and I'd sing songs and tell jokes, and the guys in the early days would come, and Nelson and Bob Nelson, Rob Bartlett, but Eddie Murphy came and was on the stage at Neptune Pub, and somebody rolled up a napkin and threw it at him. And I said, come on, we're out of here. And we left. And the owner's like, you can't just walk out. And I said, they can't throw things at somebody on stage. That is verboten. Yeah, and we actually, I'm sure Eddie would never remember that. The guy called me up and gave me more money, and we were back there the next week.
Wow, you pulled them out, like pulling your team off the field.
Which, like a Leo DeRocha. And it was just my gig. I mean, I was probably making $30, It's not like
Remember
I gave
the
up my
Ground
house.
Round restaurant chain? We used to do shows at the Ground Round, and they had peanuts on the table,
you were
with
supposed to-
natural ammunition.
And you were supposed to open the peanuts and drop the...
I know.
So somebody's not only going to the bathroom, but...
But they used to throw them at the comics, and
it
we
was
dealt
almost,
with it.
It almost was like, please throw these.
Yes. Yes. I was on stage at the original Catch a Rising Star when a fight broke out. Have you ever had a fight, actual fight, while you were performing? That happened to me. I've seen two comics have glasses thrown at them that fortunately missed. Jerry Seinfeld one time at Catch a Rising Star, and wonderful New York comic Bill McCarty in New Jersey was doing a parody of the Catholic Church, and somebody lost it and just missed him, hit the back wall. He stayed up there and continued.
I don't think I ever saw any actual fights. I know Jerry Dinerstein, who is now Jerry Diner, was on stage at some little tiny club out in Suffolk that I was producing a show, and he said, hey, look at this Hell's Angel here. And the guy was going to beat the hell out of him, not for calling him a Hell's Angel, but because he wasn't a Hell's Angel. He was a member of the other motorcycle group in the area, and he was insulted. I actually hit him in the back seat of my car on the floor.
He got the motorcycle gang wrong, and that was the offense.
I was going to say the Pythagorean, whoever they were, but I thought that was so. It wasn't like, hey, look at this motorcycle bum. It was like, look at the wrong motorcycle bum. It's. I do know that when me and Bates were playing at the Lobster House, we had a 2-man group. We played guitars at this seaside restaurant in the winter. It was horrible. Never anybody. But they would come, and this one night we had a really decent crowd in there. It was an old Bayville place. So underneath was like 2 or 3 feet of crawl space and sand, and that's where the fuse box was. So we're playing, and the lights go out. So me and the owner, this old fat Italian guy, climb under, and we're crawling in the sand to fix the fuse. And all of a sudden, because we're right, there's the floor. And I'm like, holy Christ, is this what it sounds like underneath a bar with, like 100 people in it? God, it sounds like a world war up there. And then when we got back up, they said, oh man, there was a fight. There really was a fight.
Well, what a story to hide the fact that you were hiding under the floor during the fight.
Oh, I ran for it.
You made up this whole thing about a fuse box?
They did. They used to fight in a bar we played in Lincoln Park, Detroit. The motorcycle bums in Lincoln Park, Detroit. It was like 1971, and it's like 2 or 3 years after the fact they discovered LSD. So these hitters, these rough and tumble, whatever we called them in those days, the grease balls, would take acid and fight. And I can still remember we're on stage playing "Gimme Shelter." War, it's just a shot away, and they're beating the punches. And you had to keep playing. The owners were like, keep going, don't stop,
Wow.
But this all stemmed out of the whole Will Smith hitting Chris Rock, and you wonder what you're allowed to say and what you shouldn't say. And we talked a lot about different heckles and stuff. Otto and George was this. Otto was this ventriloquist, and he had a bad puppet, a bad dummy named George. And he was a horrible ventriloquist. Not only that, I don't know if you remember, there was like a year or 2 that George's mouth didn't work.
Right.
And his
I
mouth
remember that.
would
He
get
didn't even
stuck.
care.
Yeah, and he would have to lean over and push the mouth closed. And then the dummy would yell at him like, I can't believe you're such a drunk that you can't get it together to get my mouth fixed. But he had a talk show. It was called Otto and George's Pig Roast. And Otto and George were Johnny Carson. And you sat there and you're interviewed by Otto and George. And You don't know. Do you talk to Otto, or do you talk? If you talk
the
to
dummy.
Otto, you're not talking to who's talking to you.
Right.
If you're talking to George, you're talking to a dummy. It was just funny before you even started. I did it like 3 times. It was horrible. I think they've been playing them on the web. Otto and George's pig roast.
If you Google Otto and George, this was a ventriloquist and his dummy who said what you really can't say. And that's what was...
most people would never even think of really saying.
You can't say that. As I said, it was so bad it was good. It was springtime for Hitler. He said things nobody else would say, and it had such an appeal that people really would flock to it because you can't believe he's being that insulting.
How are you doing, George? I had a date last night. How was that? Well, I went to the door, and the door opened, and there was my date. And her father said, and when he... To highlight what he was saying, his head would go up 2 inches. Like he'd go, bang, right? And he goes, and he says, and her father said, "What are your intentions?" I said, "What do you mean? What are my intentions? I want to," and he's, I want to bang her, and just, it's just, what are your intentions?
And he did.
I want to bang her. Oh God.
He did ethnic insults from another time, from another century, that I'm not going to repeat now. And it was, you can't believe that the dummy, because Otto, was soft-spoken. The dummy was George, of course. And the dummy could say anything.
And he was so brilliant. The dummy would yell at him for being too coked up, for being too drunk, for being too high. The dummy would, it was a little bit not a little, it was very mind-bending. It was incredible.
It was mind-bending. Yeah, a PhD student could write a dissertation on that.
I always wanted to do a documentary on him because here's this guy out in front of the stage being so crazy and so wild, and then this guy goes into the green room and he's just an absolute mess, and he just he just should have been famous and just wasn't famous,
Well, to our audience who doesn't know Otto and George, again, Google him. He was the late Otto.
Otto Peterson.
Otto Peterson. And, of course, when he dies, it's like 2 people die because the dummy dies. And
there's a very famous story. I actually talked to him, and I was supposed to do a documentary with him. And I finally talked him into it. And I was going to meet him at the little bar restaurant around the corner from my city apartment. And we had a date to meet for lunch. And he stood me up. And I said, well, that's it. Because, in the old days when I used to book people, I stopped booking him because by the 3rd time that he's supposed to show up and headline a show, and he's just not there. He could be your best friend. Right. I'm sorry, we can't do that. Right. So he stood me up, and I'm like, fool me once, fool me twice. This is a guy you never would book because he wouldn't show, and now you're sitting saying, I can't believe he's not showing for lunch. But what had happened, and you might have heard of this, I hope I didn't talk about it already, he went to do Opie and Anthony. And either he left his dummy in the car or forgot it or something. And he said, he went in and he said, I can't do this without George. And I guess for like 20 minutes, they berated him and made fun of him and what a loser and what a jerk because he couldn't sit there and just do it. And he's on the radio. Yeah. And this is before people were doing it, on TV too, it was just radio. But he couldn't sit there and go, hey, how you doing? And I guess he got so frustrated, he stormed out of there and got in the car and went home. And that was the reason he didn't meet me for lunch, which at least is part of a fantastic
But I totally
story.
understand that he couldn't do it without George.
Yeah, it's as,
And of course, we do history on this show. Think about the great Edgar Bergen on the radio, a ventriloquist on the radio. And he needed Charlie McCarthy.
I wonder if
he needed Charlie McCarthy, his dummy. He needed him there.
I wonder if he ever stood there and did,
No, I don't think, I can't imagine that you could do that. You would need your dummy right there.
That's so weird.
And that reminds me of a club that we used to play, Dubonnaise. And this is a famous story. We love a Long Island ventriloquist. And you know who I'm talking about.
Vince D'Antona.
Vince D'Antona. And ironically, George was his dummy as well.
Yeah, I guess that's the going name for It's not a puppet, it's a dummy.
It's a dummy. I
Ventriloquist
guess you
dummy.
could call it a puppet, but it's a dummy. And a very funny comedian named Jeff Zabrowski hit his head on the piano doing a flip as part of a routine in which he was wrestling with God.
I can see him doing
And he hits his head on the piano, and he's virtually unconscious and lying there in front of a full house. And
Don't get too excited. We're talking about 120 people.
that's exciting to me. And Vinny D'Antona and George walk up, and Zabrowski's lying on the ground, and Vinny D'Antona had George say, hey, Jeff, how you doing? You know, he used the dummy
Right.
to find out, are you okay? Are you alive? You know.
Which is because he's so locked into that.
You're locked into it, totally. And it is sad. When a ventriloquist dies, two people die because...
He was such a great character. You know, he was married.
He was married.
And he had a girl. The girl that he married also had a dummy and wanted to be in show business. She was Lucy. And Vinny, I don't care, it's just past the statute of limitations. Vinny let her be in the act, and it was unwatchable.
Yes.
It was unwatchable, but he let her be in the act because after the show, they'd go to a bar and she'd pick up a girl, and the girl would come home and fool around with the two of them. So to him, he had been in the service. He wasn't looking to get on Johnny Carson. He was looking to get a little bit and tell a few jokes, and he just didn't care. He's the greatest little cat in the world.
He loved to drink his vodka, I believe. And we had a roast for him at McGuire's Comedy Club, and the comics were going off on his drinking and having a great time, and everybody's hysterically laughing. And afterwards he goes, hey guys, you know, my wife and my kids didn't have any idea about the drinking. So we have mentioned here Otto and George, terrific, unique ventriloquist, and Vinny D'Antona and George, another terrific ventriloquist. Now, Vinny was proficient as a ventriloquist. He was very skillful.
Something that he did, this is a total non sequitur, but I had this 516-922-WINE joke line for the last 43 years. If you dial it right now, you get jokes. 516-922-9463. When I first met him, I was putting these stickers everywhere. They were ubiquitous, and everybody had a story about where they'd found one.
Yeah.
And his father worked, and I'm trying to find somebody that knows him that can rubber stamp this story.
Yeah.
His father worked at a place that made the plastic letters that go on airplanes, like a BX-73, the number of the plane that was indestructible plastic. And his father made, or his company, made 5,000 indestructible yellow 922 wine stickers. I'm still trying to find one or find somebody that could rubber stamp that story. You'd think there'd be one lying around, and I cannot find it. So, you know, and somebody said he had a brother or a cousin or something. I said, tell him to call me. I want to talk to him, see if I'm crazy, you know.
Otto had his demons, and you were aware of that, and I was aware of that, and I was giving him a ride back to New York from a gig in New Jersey, and we go over the George Washington Bridge, and I was perfectly happy to take him home, and he goes, no, drop me off here. I go, this is the George Washington Bridge. We're on the entrance ramp to the George Washington Bridge. What do you mean, drop you off here? No, drop me off here. Well, you know, he had his demons, and I guess he would find what he wanted to find.
Either he was copping coke or he was trying to get out of paying the toll.
That's probably it.
I'm saying goodbye. I cannot take any more ventriloquist stories, of course, until the next show. But till next time, I want to just say thank you very much for tuning in. We appreciate you.
This has been fun. This has been Stand Up Memories. This, of course, has been Jackie Martling, and I'm Peter Bales. We will be back with another terrific show.
If I let you.
If you let me. Hey, a new episode of Stand Up Memories every Wednesday.
How exciting is that?
Starring me, Peter Bales, and right here, Jackie the Joke Man Martling.
Please follow us on social media. Search it out. What is it? MeSpace?
MySpace,
Your space?
TikTok, Instagram, Facebook.
Doodah, doodah.